Aloha and welcome back to Island Talk Story. It is Saturday, February 7, 2026. How do you build a community? A community that actually lasts?
It's such a great question, and honestly, it's maybe the only question that really matters if you care about the place you live.
Yeah.
So today isn't just a history lesson, it's more like a tactical breakdown of civic engagement. We're going to be looking at the origins of a really amazing grassroots organization in Mānoa Valley.
Right. And just to set the table for you here, we are basing this whole deep dive on a really incredible oral history interview. It was recorded back on September 16th, 2019. The interview features two women, Mary Cooke and Helen Nakano. We need to be clear about the timeline here because the context is just everything. That interview was in 2019. Mary Cooke, one of the founders, she sadly passed away in 2022. But the organization they built, and get this, it started way back in 1992. It is still running, and it's running strong today. Helen Nakano is still active as an advisor. And that's really the mystery we want to solve today. How did they do it? How did they build something that didn't just rely on their own personalities? How do you build a machine that outlives one of its founders and continues to thrive under the guidance of the other?
This is a story about infrastructure. It's about how two women from completely different worlds, and I mean socially, economically, culturally distinct worlds, how they found a way to engineer a community organization that could survive failures, fight massive corporations, and, maybe most importantly, bring people together who usually wouldn't even talk to each other.
And the setting for this whole origin story is just perfect. The interview itself took place at Mary Cooke's home on Mānoa Road. So you just have to picture it. These two women sitting in this historic space, reflecting on nearly 30 years of work together.
And for you, the listener, here's the why. You might be thinking, why should I care about some neighborhood organization in Manoa if I live in Kailua or Brooklyn or Tokyo? You should care because they solve the three biggest problems every single community group faces. How do you bridge a cultural divide? How do you fund your work without begging for dues every single year? And how do you lose the battle but still win the war?
To understand the organization, you first have to understand the DNA of the founders. Let's start with Mary Cooke.
So Mary's grandfather was a man named Joseph Hughes Moran. He arrived here in the islands in 1898 from Alabama. And you just have to stop and think about that year, 1898.
The Spanish-American War.
Exactly. He was a veteran. He'd actually signed up to fight with Teddy Roosevelt's Rough Riders. Now, that tells you something about a person, right?
Right.
You don't sign up for the Rough Riders if you're a passive observer of life. You're someone looking for action. You're looking to shape the world around you.
But the war ended before he really got into the mix in the Philippines, wasn't that it?
That's right. So he finds himself in Hawaii. And this is really where the theme of engineering enters Mary's bloodline. He starts in Hilo, but he eventually moves to Kauai to become the county civil engineer. And Mary tells this story about him with such reverence. He paved the roads from Cooke all the way to Heine.
Wow. Okay, now, for anyone who hasn't driven that stretch on Kauai, that is not a flat, easy drive. Not at all.
No. And back then, these were just dirt roads. I mean, treacherous.
Yeah.
Mary talks about having these old photographs of huge paving apparatuses. Just visualize that for a second. We're not talking about a couple of guys with shovels. We're talking about massive industrial iron machines, steam and smoke, literally wrestling the landscape into submission.
It's terraforming, basically.
It is. And Mary grew up seeing that. Then you look at her father, Bill Moraine. He managed Grove Farm Plantation and Kolowa Plantation. And there was a mountain, Haupu Mountain, that literally separated the two plantations.
A literal mountain in the way of business.
Right. And most people would look at a mountain and say, well, okay, that's the boundary. Mary's father looked at the mountain and said, we need a tunnel. And so they built one. And you can still tour it today.
So if you are Mary Cooke and you're growing up in that kind of environment, your baseline assumption about the world is just... it's different from mine.
Completely different. This is the psychological insight, I think. If you grew up watching your father and your grandfather literally move mountains, pave the wilderness, build tunnels, you don't look at your neighborhood as some fixed object. You see it as something that can be managed, that can be engineered, that can be improved. You have a sense of agency that feels almost genetic.
And that agency, it seems like it extended to the actual homes she lived in, too. I mean, she didn't grow up in tract housing.
No, not at all. She grew up in these grand old colonial homes, first on Rice Street in Lihue, and then later in a manager's home that was built by Daisy Wilcox. And she explicitly connects this in the interview. She says her passion for historic preservation didn't come from reading a book. It came from her lived environment. She loved these houses. She understood them from the inside out.
But she wasn't just, a princess in a tower. She was a maker. She did things with her hands.
Incredibly tactile. So she went to Cornell for home economics and UC Berkeley for teaching. But her real skills, you could argue, were manual. She learned to sew when she was just 10 years old at the Kawakami store. She made her own aloha shirts. She made her own Maid Queen dress, the hollow ku. She even made her own wedding dress.
Okay, that's a level of confidence I just cannot imagine. Making your own wedding dress?
But it speaks to that same engineering mindset, doesn't it? Whether it's a road, a tunnel, or a wedding dress, Mary understood how things were put together. She understood structure. So when she later looks at a community organization, she's going to approach it the same way. How do we stitch this thing together so it holds?
So she marries Sam Cooke, another, heavyweight name in the islands, and they move to Oahu. They build a house in Manoa for $45,000.
Which is just, it's painful to hear that number in 2026. You can't even buy a parking spot for that now.
Right, I know. But here is the first real glimpse of Mary the Preservationist in action. They buy the land next door to their new house. Why? Because it had a heiau, a traditional temple on it, and developers were circling.
And this is so crucial. They didn't just buy it to keep it as a bigger yard. The heiau was a mess. It was overgrown. The rocks were all piled up. It was just disheveled. So Mary and Sam hired Billy Fields, a scone expert from Kailua Kona, to come in and restore it properly.
They respected the host culture. They didn't just say, okay, this is ours now, we'll mow the lawn around it. They said, this is significant and it needs to be fixed the right way.
Exactly. And that whole project gave Mary her life's motto. It's a wonderful story. She talks about a plumber who was working on their big historic house. And he's fixing all these leaks, looking at these ancient pipes, and he just shakes his head and he says to her, "No more end, no."
No more end, no. I feel like that should be on a t-shirt for every homeowner.
It should. And it's the preservationist's burden, really. Mary realized right then that caring for something, whether it's a house or a heiau or an entire valley, is a task with no finish line.
Yeah.
There is no more end.
Yeah.
You're never done. And instead of that being depressing to her, that became her fuel.
So that's Mary, the engineer's granddaughter, the maker, the woman who accepts that the work never ever ends. Now, let's bring in the other half of this incredible equation, Helen Nakano.
And Helen's story starts in a completely different universe. Her parents were immigrants from Hiroshima, Japan, and her father didn't come here with a sense of adventure or, to conquer the landscape. He came at age 18 to pay off a debt.
A literal debt, not like a debt to society.
No, a literal financial debt. His father had debts to people like Mr. Ida of the famous Ida store. And Helen mentions in the interview actually seeing the promissory note.
Wow. That just stops me in my tracks. Imagine holding the actual piece of paper that dictated your father's entire life trajectory.
It was a defining artifact for her. It represented obligation, honor, and just the sheer struggle to survive. Her family founded the M.S. Tanabe store on King Street in 1917. And this is where we see the incredible strength of the women in Helen's family.
Her mother.
Her mother, yeah. Helen calls her a woman before her time. Get this. The store was named M.S. Tanabe. Helen points out that in that era, Japanese business would almost exclusively use the husband's initials. But Helen's father included her mother's initials. M for his, S for hers.
That is a very subtle but a massive statement for that time.
It was a recognition of economic reality. Her mother ran a sewing school. She sewed clothes for wealthy people in Honolulu. She raised 5 kids. And she worked in the store. They worked 364 days a year. The only day they took off was New Year's Day.
So if Mary's DNA is engineering and management, Helen's DNA is grind and pragmatism.
Absolutely, 100%. And you see this pragmatism in Helen's own life. The story of her romance with her husband, George Nakano, is, well, it's just legendary.
Oh, I loved this part of the interview, the ultimatum.
It's fantastic. So George is finishing law school. He's an officer, and he gets this great opportunity to be stationed in Japan. So Helen tells him he should go. She says, "It's your ancestral home. You should absolutely go experience it."
That sounds very supportive.
Very supportive. But then she drops the hammer. She says, "But if you go, I am not waiting for you."
It's so cold, but also incredibly logical. It's extremely logical. She told him right to his face, "You are an American lawyer and an officer. All the young women in Japan will want to get their hands on you." She knew the market dynamics. And she said, "I cannot sit here in Hawaii and not date. That's not fair to me. So if you go alone, we break up."
She knew her worth.
She absolutely did. And George, being a very smart man, said, "Well, I guess we should get married then." And so they went to Japan together.
There's an interesting detail about their time in Japan, though. Even though George was this successful American officer, how was he actually perceived by the locals?
This is the nuance of identity, right? It's so complex. George's family spoke a rural Hiroshima dialect. So in Japan, despite his rank, despite his law degree, his accent immediately marked him as peasant class to the people there. It just shows you how complex all these social layers are. You could be high status in one context and low status in another just by opening your mouth.
So Helen eventually comes back, and her family moves to Mānoa, specifically the Woodlawn area, around 1947. Right. And we have to talk about the social geography of Mānoa back in the 40s. Helen says it was, and this is her term, unofficially restricted.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning there were no actual laws on the books saying Japanese people couldn't live there, but there were. Let's call them understandings. Realtors might not show homes to you. Neighbors might be cold. But, typical of Hawaii, it wasn't a hard and fast wall. There were families like Jerry Hondas who were already there. There were squatters like Noboru Oda. But for Helen's parents, these immigrants who scraped and saved every penny to buy a brand new house with a fireplace and woodlawn.
A fireplace in Hawaii is the ultimate status symbol, isn't it? It's totally useless, which just proves you have money to burn. Literally.
Exactly. Helen says it was unbelievable to them. That was the summit of the American dream for them.
So now we have our two main characters on the stage. Mary, the preservationist from the establishment, and Helen, the pragmatic organizer from the rising immigrant class. It's 1992. What on earth brings these two women together?
An ugly building.
It's always an ugly building, isn't it?
It is the universal catalyst for all neighborhood action. Always. Mary was absolutely furious because a beautiful old Victorian home on East Manoa Road had been demolished. And it was replaced by this boxy, two-story gray building that just ruined the streetscape.
So she does what people with connections do. She calls the guy in charge.
She calls Bill Murtaugh. And this isn't just some guy at the planning department. He was the founder of the National Register of Historic Places. I mean, that is a heavy hitter to have on speed dial.
But he didn't solve the problem for her.
No. And this is key. He gave her the best advice anyone could have given. He told her, Mary, if you don't do something, more of this will happen. Basically, stop complaining to me and go organize your neighbors.
So Mary invites him to come speak at a neighborhood board meeting. And Helen happens to be on that board. And this is the moment.
The clipboard moment. This is where it all starts. They pass a clipboard around the room for people who are interested. 37 people sign up. Helen says she thought she was just joining another committee. She had no idea Mary was roping them in to build a 30-year legacy.
Okay, now this is where we have to stop and really look at the strategy. Because usually these kinds of neighborhood groups, they flare up and then they fall apart. They turn into a little clique of friends. Mary and Helen did something very, very deliberate with the leadership structure from day one.
This is the absolute genius of the organization, which was originally called Mālama Mānoa and later shortened. In 1992, the valley was, demographically speaking, dominated by two main groups, the white, or haole population, and the Japanese-American population. So Mary and Helen looked at this reality and said, if we actually want to get anything done here, the leadership has to mirror the community.
So they institutionalized it? They made it a rule?
They did. They decided on a dual leadership model, a white president, which was Mary, and Japanese vice president, which was Helen.
Now, I want to pause here for a second. Because in 2026, or even in 2019 when this interview was done, that binary view of white and Japanese feels a little dated. The valley now is Korean, Chinese, Filipino, Pacific Islander, mixed race. I mean, it's a total melting pot.
Absolutely. And they acknowledge that in the interview. The valley is much more diverse now.
Yeah.
But we have to judge their decision in the context of 1992. It was a strategic bridge. Think about it. If the organization had just been Mary and her friends from the big colonial homes, the rest of the valley would have seen it as an elitist club, trying to tell them what to do with their property.
And if it had just been Helen's network?
It might have lacked the connections to the historic preservation institutions, the foundations, the people that Mary had in her Rolodex. They needed both. They needed the establishment influence and they needed the community hustle.
And they had different motivations, right? I was so struck by the fact that they weren't even really fighting for the same thing initially.
This is the most fascinating part of their partnership. They are partners, but they had different love languages for the valley, you could say. Mary's passion was historic preservation, full stop. She wanted to save the structures, the architecture, the physical look and feel of the place.
And Helen?
Helen explicitly says in the interview, and I'm quoting here, I wasn't interested in old houses.
She just came right out and said it.
She did. She said her passion was community building. She wanted to connect people. She saw the organization as a vehicle for human connection. Mary saw it as a vehicle for saving buildings. And guess what? Those two goals fit together perfectly. You can't save buildings without organizing people, and people need a cause to come together around.
Okay, let's talk about money. Let's talk about the no dues policy, because this is the part where, I'll be honest, I get skeptical. Helen insisted that membership had to be free, no annual fee. You sign up one time, you are a member for life.
Member for life. It's a powerful phrase.
It is, but come on, if I don't pay for something, do I really value it? And more importantly, how do you pay for flyers, lawyers, or even just the coffee and snacks for the meeting if nobody is paying dues?
That was exactly the argument against it at the time. Conventional nonprofit wisdom says you need dues to create skin in the game and, to keep the lights on. But Helen had a different, and I think much deeper, insight. She realized that dues are a barrier.
A financial barrier, obviously.
Yes, but also a psychological and an administrative barrier. Think about it. If you charge, say, $5 a year, you have to spend hours and hours chasing people for that $5. Oh, did you renew? Your check bounced. We need to update the database.
Yeah.
You spend 80% of your energy just managing the membership instead of doing the actual work.
That is so true. I unsubscribe from things all the time just because I don't want to find my credit card and enter the info again.
Exactly. Helen wanted volume. She wanted political clout. If you go to the city council and say, I represent 200 paying members, that's one thing. If you can say, I represent 2,000 residents of this valley, they sit up and listen. By making it free, they built a massive list.
But that brings us right back to the money question. You still need cash. You can't pay a lawyer with political clout.
And this is where the blueprint gets really technical and just brilliant. They knew they needed a war chest, so they created a project, the book.
Mānoa, the story of a valley.
You've probably seen it. It's iconic, that green cover. But the story of how it got printed is the real lesson here. So a woman named B. Krause, a wonderful historian and botanist, had written the manuscript, but it was just sitting at Mutual Publishing gathering dust. Mary went to the publisher and asked why, and they said, we don't have the money to print it.
So Mary and Helen basically became venture capitalists for a book.
Essentially, yes. They created sponsorship levels. $500, $1,000, $5,000. They went to the Atherton Foundation, to the Bank of Hawaii. They hustled. They went out and raised the money to pay for the printing costs completely up front.
Okay, so the book exists. They have boxes of them. Now, how do they sell it and make money?
This is my favorite detail of the whole story. They partnered with Long's Drugs in Mānoa Marketplace. Now, usually, a retailer takes a cut, right? 30, 40, 50%. Long's agreed to sell the book and give 100% of the proceeds back to the organization.
That's incredible. That's true community partnership.
It changed everything. Because think about it. The printing was already paid for by the sponsors, and the retailer took zero commission. That meant every single dollar from selling around 8,000 copies of that book was pure profit.
That is a lot of cash for a little neighborhood group.
It is a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
And most groups would have, thrown a big party? Or hired a director?
Yeah.
Or spent it all on a single beautification project? Mary and Helen didn't do any of that.
What did they do with it?
They locked it up. On March 8, 1995, they officially established the Educational Endowment Fund. They put all the profits from the book into an endowment with one very strict rule. The principal, the corpus, cannot be touched. Ever. Only the interest generated by that principal can be used for grants and projects.
So they didn't just cash a check. They built a perpetual engine.
That's it, exactly. They turned a one-time windfall into a permanent income stream. This is why the organization survived when Mary died. This is why it's still here and effective in 2026. They aren't scrambling to sell chili tickets every year just to keep the lights on. They have a financial heartbeat that just beats on its own.
That really is the difference between a project and an institution.
Precisely. And that is the lesson for anyone listening right now. If you want to build something that lasts, don't just plan the next event. Plan the economic engine that will pay for the event 20 years from now.
I want to pivot back to the people side of this for a minute. We talked about the dual leadership, but there's still a gap, right? A gap between the high preservationists like Mary and the everyday folks in the valley. Who was the person who bridged that?
Mr. Oda, Noboru Oda.
The squatter who became a successful businessman.
Yes. He is such a vital character in this story. He was uneducated in the formal sense, but he was a brilliant businessman and a real leader of the Japanese school in the valley. He represented a part of the community that might have been very suspicious of Mary Cooke and her ideas about historic preservation.
But they formed a connection.
They did. and it was based on mutual respect. Mary, who is sometimes called the Queen of Mānoa because of her stature, she insisted that everyone just call her Mary, no titles. But she always called him Mr. Oda.
What do you think that was?
It was a sign of respect. She recognized his authority and his standing in his community, and he felt that respect. There is this really touching story Helen tells about a testimonial dinner they held for Mary years later. Mr. Oda stood up to give a speech, and he said, quite honestly, you know, I didn't know how Lees worked hard too.
Oh, wow. That's raw.
It's so honest. And it shows you the stereotypes that existed on both sides. Maybe some of the white residents thought the Japanese residents were insular, and maybe some of the Japanese residents thought the white residents were lazy aristocrats. Working together on Mālama Mānoa just shattered all of that. They saw each other sweating. They saw each other stuffing envelopes at midnight. That builds trust faster than any diversity workshop ever could.
But we have to be real here. It wasn't just a straight line of success after success. They had a massive failure, a really public one.
The historic district.
This is their big dream, right? To get the entire valley designated.
It was really Mary's dream. She wanted to create a designated historic district for all of Mānoa. This would mean real regulations on what you could tear down, what you could build, how you could renovate your home. She thought she was saving the valley's character.
And the valley said, no, thank you.
The valley screamed no. Residents were terrified of property rights infringements. They didn't want some committee telling them they couldn't fix their termite-eaten wall or upgrade their single-pane windows.
And it got personal. It got ugly.
It got very ugly. Posters started going up. The racial tensions that Mary and Helen had worked so hard to bridge just flared right back up. It was framed by the opponents as howly against others, you know, the wealthy white preservationists trying to control the local, often non-white residents.
That must have been devastating for them, especially after building those bridges.
It was a real low point. But this is where the masterclass part of the story comes in. They didn't quit. They didn't get mad and dissolve the organization. They analyzed the failure. Both Helen and Mary admitted later that they should have started small.
Like a pilot program or something.
Exactly. They realized after the fact they should have tried to designate just one single street like College Hills to show people it wasn't scary, that it could add value. Trying to regulate the whole valley at once was just hubris. It was too much, too fast. They learned the absolute limits of their influence.
But because they didn't quit, because they learned that lesson, they were still organized and ready when the real villain showed up.
The Hiko fight. This is the true David versus Goliath moment of their story.
The fight for the diamond head of Mānoa.
That's what they call the Waʻahila Ridge. And Hawaiian Electric, or ECO, wanted to install these massive 138 kV transmission lines right across the top of the ridge. It would have scarred the viewplane of the entire valley forever.
And usually when the power company wants to do something, they do it. They have the lawyers, they have the money, they have the time, they can outlast anyone.
But Mālama Mānoa had Mary Cooke and her no more end philosophy. They fought this for 10 years.
10 years. How do you keep a volunteer group motivated for a decade of legal battles and paperwork?
Well, a big infusion of cash helped. Mariana Gerbode of the Gerbode Foundation stepped in. She saw this fight as critical. She actually compared it to the fight to save Diamond Head from high-rises back in the day. She personally covered the legal fees, which ended up being around $250,000.
$250,000.
That's what it takes to fight a major utility. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about reputation. Kelvin Takita, who was on the HECO board at the time, apparently warned his colleagues. He told them flat out, Mary Cooke is going to eat you for lunch.
I love that image. Mary Cooke, this polite, well-dressed elderly lady in her beautiful colonial house, and the corporate board of HECO is terrified of her.
Because she was relentless. And so was Helen. They mobilized the entire community. They were out there gathering signatures at the Safeway, which is basically the town square of Mānoa. They held all these community meetings at the Church of the Crossroads. They just made it impossible for ex-OCO to proceed quietly. They made it a huge public battle.
And ECO blinked.
They gave up.
Yeah.
They completely abandoned the plan. The lines were never built. And that victory just cemented the organization's legitimacy forever. They proved they weren't just about saving cute old houses. They were about defending the literal skyline of the valley against corporate overreach.
So let's bring it all to today. It's February 2026. Mary is gone. The valley has changed. It's more expensive. It's more diverse. It's more crowded. But the organization is still there.
It is. And that is the ultimate design success, a proof of concept. Because they established that endowment, the money is there. Because they established the member-for-life culture, the people are there. Helen is still there as an advisor, passing down all that institutional memory. They built a structure that allows new leaders to step in without having to rebuild the entire foundation from scratch every single time.
It really redefines what leadership means, doesn't it? We usually think of the leader as the person who's always holding the microphone, but Mary and Helen were. They were architects. They designed a system.
That's the perfect word for it, architects. Mary brought the vision of what to save, the physical heritage. Helen brought the blueprint of how to save it, the people, the money, the organization. And together they built something that was so much stronger than either of them could have been individually.
So if we boil all this down for our listener, someone who maybe looks at their own neighborhood and sees a problem, an ugly building, something, what is the takeaway?
For me, it all comes down to the complementary partnership. You cannot do this alone. And more specifically, you cannot do it with someone who is exactly like you. If Mary had partnered with another wealthy preservationist, they would have been seen as an elite club and they would have failed. If Helen had partnered with another community organizer who didn't have Mary's connections, they might have just run out of steam and money. You have to find the person who has the keys to the doors you can't open.
And you have to accept that there is no more end.
Right. That's the mindset shift. Community building isn't a project you finish and then you get a plaque. It's a garden you tend. It never, ever ends. And once you accept that, you stop looking for the finish line and you just start doing the work day by day.
I just keep thinking about that member for life concept. It's such a fundamental shift in how we think about community. You don't subscribe to your community. You're in it. You can't opt out.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We are all members for life of the places we live. The only question is whether we're going to be active members or sleeping members.
So here is our challenge to you, listening right now. Look at your street. Look around your neighborhood. What is the ugly gray building that is bothering you? What is the thing that makes you want to start passing around a clipboard?
And maybe more importantly, who is the Helen to your Mary or the Mary to your Helen? Who is the person from a totally different background, someone you might not naturally hang out with, who you need to partner with to actually get anything done?
Find that person, start the clipboard, and remember, the work never ends. But that's the whole point.
Aloha.
Thanks for listening to Island Talk Story. Aloha!